Cartier, Rolex, Gucci, Prada, Jordan, Adidas, Bottega Veneta. At eBay, it's real or it's getting the fake out. eBay's team of luxury authenticators make sure that you never get faked over. Watches inspected by watch aficionados, sneakers checked by legit sneakerheads, handbags examined by handbag connoisseurs, and jewelry in the scopes of expert gemologists. The details inspected, the fakes rejected. Ensure your next purchase is the real deal with eBay's authenticity guarantee. Everyone deserves real. Visit ebay.com for terms.
What's the worst thing about sports? That's right, all those unnecessary breaks in play. But you can make them all better by using Grubhub. Grubhub has every food you could possibly crave, from national favorites to local spots. Order through the Grubhub app or online today at Grubhub.com. And with the holidays right around the corner, Grubhub gift cards are the perfect gift for everyone on your list. No dishes, just satisfied cravings all holiday season. Download the Grubhub app or visit Grubhub.com today. Go for Grubhub.
This holiday, Audible invites you to listen in on some of today's most creative musicians telling their stories in their own words. Origins is an Audible Originals podcast series featuring music and memories from artists like Billie Eilish, Camilo, Doja Cat, Flying Lotus, and more. Discover what shaped their creativity and get drawn into the immersive sound design that lets you feel the experiences that inspired them. Start listening to this innovative new series at audible.com/origins.
You're listening to 100 Words or Less with Ray Harkins. Howdy, y'all. Hopefully this summer is kicking off very, very well for you. I know it is for me. We have a great guest on the show today. His name is Bryan Fair. He is the vocalist for Overcast, for Shadows Fall, and he is just in my mind, a New England metal and hardcore legend. This dude has done a lot within the context of independent music and has been able to, spin it into a career that spans for many, many years. And I've just always really respected not only his bands and his art, but his own personal music taste. Like, he definitely doesn't just stick to a lane. And anyways, all that to say, I have Bryan on the show, and I'm very excited about that because we go deep into his background, why he cares about music so much, what he's been up to ever since Shadows Fall started to turn down their touring life and all that stuff. But first of all, checking in, how are you? The world is wild now because, I'm sure you are feeling that impact of, like, all of a sudden there's a ton of things happening. Shows are coming back, tours are getting announced. Everything is, seemingly kind of locking back into a normal cadence, whether that's being able to hang out with friends and, all that sort of stuff. Please take care of each other, be safe, do everything that you need to do in order to make sure that this weirdo virus just stays contained. I'm definitely seeing people more and more. I got to participate in Record Store Day, which I'll talk about that in a moment, but ultimately take care of each other and make sure that we're all being safe, because that's the only way that the world will really truly turn back to normal. And then obviously also get vaccinated. Just do that, please. I'm not even going to really go into much more detail on that, but just get vaccinated. That'll help us all get back to shows in a much more real way. But Record Store Day, let's talk about this. So I actually went to Program, Skate, and Record Shop in Fullerton, California here. A great place. If you have not ever gone there and you are in the Southern California area, you absolutely have to go there. Independently run. One of the vocalists, the vocalist for Death by Stereo and Voodoo Glow Skulls and Manic Hispanic, Ephraim. And I don't know why I haven't had him on the podcast. He's an old friend. But anyways, he is a co-owner of this shop. And it was, I have I guess you would call it a love-hate relationship with Record Store Day. Record Store Day has been a boon to independent record stores and has brought a lot of people in the doors to these places that they normally may not ever go into in the first place. But, due to the limited nature of a lot of these record pressings and all that stuff, it brings people in. And obviously that is a great thing because it helps record stores stay in business. On the other hand, where are you the rest of the year? Are you buying your vinyl via Urban Outfitters or, Amazon? It's like, buy it directly from record labels, or, buy it from independent distros, like do that on a regular basis. And that definitely helps out our independent music community. And so there is, and then plus like the resources of allocation of records that are being pressed. Like there's a lot of records that are coming out on a, record store day basis that, each year as the list comes out, I look at it and there's less and less that I'm interested in. And that could just be to my own personal changing taste, or the fact that a lot of other labels are seeing this as a quick way to, make a few shekels off of repressing, old records, or, finding archived music. And not to say that there's anything entirely wrong with that, but, you see those records that come up that just feel like absolute cash grabs. And that's what bums me out. So what do you feel about Record Store Day? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Where do you sit? You can email the show, 100wordspodcast@gmail.com. Always love to have that feedback. Or if you have other guest ideas, because I really like it when people come in and either introduce me to people who are like, hey, this would be a great guest for reasons A, B, and C, and then we make it happen. Or if that's just, aspirational, being like, hey, that'd be great if you had this person on the show. So that's what we got. Let's talk to Brian Fair. Like I said, legend in my own mind. I am describing him as such. And we have a lot of fun in this. So let's talk to Brian.
And I definitely played a terrible show with you before when Overcast came through, Showcase Theater.
Overcast has played many terrible shows in our existence, so,
Exactly. For sure. It was definitely, the reason it was so terrible for us was because, this is us being a dumb local band. Like we broke our guitar string, and then I was sitting there in front of a sold out Showcase Theater, asking if anybody had a guitar we could borrow, which is clearly, not a good move.
Well, it's clearly the most 90s hardcore thing that's possible, because who hasn't done that at some point in their existence? And what's so great is the idea of a backup guitar becomes down the road such a normal thing, but then it was unheard of. Like, what do you think? I have two of these things? No way, I don't have two of these things. I'm lucky I have one.
It's very true. Yeah, just and the notion that like once people like had like a guitar rack, it was like, oh my god, like I don't have to like precariously balance this guitar on my amp. It's
totally like what a novel idea. Who thought of these things?
Totally. That was, one of my earlier experiences in being a fan of Overcast. But I remember, following you from obviously Overcast to Shadows Fall. It was really interesting because, and I'm sure you're going to laugh at this, where I know people started to be like, hey, Shadows Fall, like they're pretty good. They have this record called, Of One Blood that basically sounds like a more professional Cave-In. I was like, oh, interesting. Like, okay, I didn't, the notions of what Shadows Fall was at the time, was basically, for lack of a better term, a, metalcore influenced band or whatever. I just was taken aback by that kind of description, because it was like, well, these guys come from the same scene, so it's not like necessarily they are like trying to be a more professional version of Cave-In or something like that. I just found
that is honestly a hilarious description. Just because it's funny, because I think of Cave-In as such a professional band. I'm like, those guys knew how to write songs with hooks and stuff, So, but that's hilarious. If anything, I was like, we were stealing more thrash metal at that point in the Of One Blood days than anything else, or actually a lot of Swedish death metal too. So
no, and that's a good point, and that actually dovetails nicely into the kind of question where it was, and then in listening to it with that sort of context, I was like, oh yeah, like I could see where maybe someone was making that comparison, but it's like, yeah, you guys were pulling from obviously different influences than. It's not like you started up like once you joined the band, like, all right, guys, like, I'm going to sing, I'm going to scream, like, this is what we're going for. But I presume that like once you came into the band and things became a little bit, more quote unquote serious, you guys were all just bringing your influences to the table, right?
Yeah, well, that first, especially of One Blood, it's such a blender of our influences because we were still trying to figure out exactly what we were going to sound like in that. It was my first record really writing with the guys. We used a few older songs from the Somber Eyes from the Sky era, but we were really trying to figure out what we were all about. And musically, at that point, we had a common kind of bedrock, whether it was thrash metal or like a lot of the what I consider metalcore, which is like Leeway, Cro-Mags, early Life of Agony, that type of stuff. And thrash metal, like the Bay Area stuff. Testament was a huge one we were all super into. And obviously At the Gates and In Flames were an influence. But then outside of that kind of common ground, we all came from very different places. Like our drummer at the time, who was known as The Knife back then, Dave Germain. I mean, that dude pretty much listened to like Ween and like ska, So I remember we had to teach him like a blast beat because he didn't have a real reference point. We're like, imagine a polka going like, methamphetamine fast, and he figured it out. So, and then like, Paul was kind of the old punk rocker who was, grew up on the Clash and like, real old hardcore, like, SSD, DYS kind of stuff. And then Johnny Rock and Roll, our lead guitar player, was just a child of Sebastian Bach and Guns N' Roses and stuff. So even though he was born after that stuff, which is crazy. So we were bringing all kinds of shit, and you hear it in that first record where like, man, we let it all out. There's riffs that have that kind of thrashy metalcore sound, but then there's stuff that could have been like no effect style drum beats, and then like weird other, just all kinds of influences on that one where we were just throwing it all at the wall at that point.
Yeah, for sure. And that honestly, I mean, that's very indicative of that time too, because there was so much experimentation within the context of heavy music where people were just like, well, yeah, like, let's combine this riff salad and see what comes out.
Well, that was definitely the time. And I look at the bands we went on those first early tours with, it would be like Shadows Fall, Candiria, Bane, and like All Out War. And you're like, all right, we just covered like pretty much every direction that heavy music is going in the next few years,
Right.
And those eclectic kind of bills. And we all were influencing each other by being like, oh, cool. The rules are just kind of getting thrown out. The walls are kind of crumbling between genres. Unfortunately, it did spawn the super hyphenated subgenre insanity that would, kind of come next, where instead of just calling it, heavy music or hardcore or metal, it had to have 3 hyphens, But at that time, all bets were off, And you look at the bands who kind of really started getting their stride at that time, like whether it was Converge or Dillinger Escape Plan, ourselves or Killswitch, all doing different kind of stuff, but like not afraid to just say fuck it and go for it,
Yeah, absolutely, totally. Just like, hey, we're putting this out there, and if you like it, you can follow along. If not, find the bands that we're touring with or whatever.
There was literally no real ideas of like, hey, you could make a living at this and it's like going to be a career. That wasn't like on the agenda either. So you had a lot more freedom as far as expectations or later on, honestly, to having just be like, hey, this is our job as well, so we got to make sure we can pay rent and stuff. None of that stuff was a factor then. So the creativity and the just sort of taking chances, it really was what it was all about. That was the exciting part of it, which you try to keep alive as things continue. But at that era, like at the very beginning, I mean, that's what was made that so special.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And we'll pull on those strings a little bit more later, but, focusing on you, I know you were born in the, born and raised kind of in the Boston or the greater Boston area, as it were. I don't know. Do you have any siblings or are you an only child?
I had an older brother. We were very different. We got into music together, but then he became like super athlete and, was like a 2 sport Division I, college athlete and stuff like that. And what's funny is, honestly, he probably goes to more metal shows these days than I do, although pre-pandemic, obviously. But but I got into music real early on. Like I started going to concerts at a crazy early age where a cool neighbor and cool uncles got me to like, I saw early tours of like, I saw Guns N' Roses on the Appetite tour with Aerosmith. I got to see The Cure really early on. I got to see just a bunch of stuff, getting dragged to shows with. And then my parents, some reason, started letting me go to hardcore shows when I was like 14. And that's when it all really changed, especially in Boston that time in the early 90s. I mean, that was like the greatest place to kind of come up going to hardcore shows because, man, the scene was huge, but also became really eclectic too. And I was like a little dude just absorbing it all and trying to survive.
And I think it's very, I agree. Just, I mean, coming up from the West Coast perspective, and then once I started to understand these, geographical regions and how original, especially like the Boston area, where it's so wild to look at bands like, Sam Black Church and like Only Living Witness, and just being like that was hardcore at that time. Like that's wild. And right, exactly what you're talking about, where it's like you had all of these, disparate influences just pouring into your head.
Yeah, it was really all over the place where that was what was great is there were sort of bands that were, influencing each other and, had some similar sounds, but man, it was all over the place. And I miss the very early days when it would be like, hardcore kids versus metal dudes in the early Boston, violent days. When I was there, it was more all combined. I would go see, Leeway with Kingpin and all these other bands that had totally different styles, and it was just opened your mind to so many different things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know just from some internet research, like a professional truly does. I know that your parents were teachers. What subjects were they teaching? Were they teaching elementary school, high school? What were they doing?
My dad taught elementary school for his whole time. Mostly fourth grade. I think he might have bounced around a little bit in the early days. But he was mostly fourth grade. And then my mom was a middle school special education teacher. And yeah, they taught for for decades until they retired in Framingham, which is probably about 25 minutes west of Boston. So it's finally actually became a city. It's been big enough to be a city forever, but they refused to give up their selectmen and stayed a town forever. Some insider Massachusetts politics there for you.
Sure.
But they did officially become a city. But it was also a very diverse kind of community. We lived about 20 minutes from there. Thankfully, my parents did not teach in the school I went to because, man, I can't even imagine. I wouldn't have gotten away with anything. It was a lot easier without them around. So, so I'm glad they taught elsewhere. But having parents for teachers, I think, pushed me to not only got me, interested in things like literature and philosophy. And it was also, we had summers off, so we got to travel a ton. That got the travel bug in me because my parents always had that as well. So they really opened me up to a lot of things. They were not musically as far as playing, but they listened to tons of music, mostly oldies and old rock and roll and some jazz. But but there was always music around the house.
No, that's cool. And I think too, when you have that experience as you did with, education being important and kind of following that lead, but then also understanding that arts are important, I think, that clearly combines to create you as a person.
Oh, without a doubt. That was a huge, there was a lot of freedom in that as far as intellectual freedom. They would really let me explore my own ideas, and they nurtured that for sure. My dad was driving Overcast to some of our earliest shows when I think Mike D might have had a license, but he was the only one. And he would drive us 2 hours to Western Massachusetts to play the Greenfield Grange on like a Sunday, and man, the best story, I'll never forget. We played, I think Sam Black Church was headlining, and this band Drown, who would go on, some of the guys went on to start One King Down the road, but when they were Drowned, they drove out from Albany, and my dad's filming, and he'd never seen us really play before. And the guys from Albany all of a sudden come in during our first song. They showed up late, got there, and we're talking fingerless gloves, deicide, long sleeves, and just full on like swinging mosh, like style, like Albany hard dudes, And right. My dad's just on camera, just like, holy shit, they're animals, just like losing his mind. You hear him yelling in the back. It's so funny. And after that, he was just kind of like, yeah, that's your thing. Like, I get it. Like, not my thing, but, like you do crazy.
Yeah, so. Totally. It's like, if you're into that, Brian, that's cool. I'm exposed to it. I don't get it.
Are they trying to hurt each other? I'm like, well, not technically, but it's going to happen,
Yeah, it's a release, Dad.
Yeah, totally.
So, and kind of having that experience, like was, being a teacher kind of ever in the cards for you at one point?
I was a literature major, which is one of those degrees where you're like, I don't know what I want to do things. So maybe that was in the back of my head. I could go that way. But honestly, the patience that I saw them have as teachers, I don't know. Like, especially now, I have two, young kids. I got a 5-year-old and about to be 8-year-old, and I am super patient with them on this level, but I can't imagine it in an educational scenario. So I have nothing but the highest respect and esteem for the patience of teachers, especially in this day and age where kids seem to make it as hard as possible and parents make it even harder. So, but it would have been nice to jump right into like maybe, college professor style, but I don't think I could have gone. I don't think I had it in me to go through the ropes to get there.
Sure. No, I totally get that. And, kind of seeing how, like you said, all these different musical influences, started to participate in your life. I'm going to guess that there were a few, I'm using air quotes here, maybe like musical Sherpas for you, people, whether it was like your older brother that was, kind of taking you to record stores and shows and stuff like that. Or, who were those people for you as they started, you started to become more educated on music overall?
Yeah, early on, it was my neighbor. His name was Jamie Shanahan, and he actually was my first guitar teacher. And he turned me on, and this is when I was real little, to like Kiss and Rush and Van Halen and things like that. And so honestly, getting exposed to like Rush, the technical side of that, at an early age, I think kind of prepared me down the road. But also the theatrics of Kiss and seeing all that was crazy. So he was probably the first one, and that put me on that kind of rock and roll path. But then really meeting Mike D, who I went on to start Overcast with, and who is now in Killswitch Engage. I met him skateboarding at my friend's ramp in my town. He had come to visit. I think he was friends with the dude's cousin or something like that. And we started talking, and I had gotten into punk rock mostly through Thrasher and through skateboarding and things like that. So I knew all the big names, the Misfits and, Black Flag. And I'd even found some Youth Crew stuff like Youth of Today. I think I got the Break Down the Walls cassette free with Thrasher. And that kind of turned me on to Revelation Records. But I didn't know like that there was like a local hardcore scene or anything like that. I played a Battle of the Bands with a punk band and stuff like that, but I didn't know. And he's just like, hey man, you want to go see this band Leeway this weekend? And like, we went to the Channel in Boston, and that changed everything. And then he started, showing me all these other, more underground bands, and a lot of the kind of Boston local bands, like, Finally Find, just all the 7 inches and everything else that he had. I started devouring, going through, and that we started Overcast probably 2 weeks after meeting. He had a bunch of riffs from an old thing he was doing, and I was like, I want to be in a band that sounds like the Cro-Mags, and he's like, so do I. Let's do it. So he was that first real kind of musical Sherpa, I guess you'd say, in the heavy scene of things. But then it's funny because then from there we kind of started trying to discover new music together. We both stumbled across Neurosis together and some of the darker, heavier bands and things like that. So we started discovering stuff together. But he kind of kicked open a lot of doors for me early that I probably wouldn't have found on my own.
Yeah, that's great. And especially too, once you find that, a friend or group of friends or whoever you're bouncing stuff, with, you start to really bounce stuff off of each other. And like you say, oh, have you heard Neurosis? And you really
get so excited to show them something that they may be into that they haven't heard of, But also it's funny how hardcore then was so different, because if you didn't have someone like that to be like, hey, check out these bands, you probably didn't find out about them unless you stumbled across them randomly later on. So even like my little hardcore world was relegated at first to that, because it wasn't like you could get on, now if you're into, say, Judge or something, you put it on Spotify and it'll tell you about 30 million other bands that are, in that world. Whereas before, like if you didn't get a mixtape of a bunch of 7 inches, like that was what it was. And then you find a zine and, read the thanks list of these other bands and find your own way. But it was really those people around you that turned you on to these bands then. And it was so like regional that way. Like certain bands became huge in just like clusters of the scene itself, where like my group of friends were all obsessed with this band Arise from our local area, and we thought were the greatest thing. And everyone, how does no one in this world know? And they're like, well, because they've only played in this like, literally 10-mile geographical area, So it's funny how different that is now. But back then it was like treasure hunting, And you needed a map or at least or a Sherpa to get you there.
No, absolutely. And that regionality, prior to the internet, globalizing everything, it definitely, like you said, it was so interesting to watch that happen where it's like, this band is the biggest thing in a 40-mile radius. Like,
and it would be crazy like that hardcore wise, especially like, dude, I remember you went to Providence, Rhode Island. If you saw the band Temperance in like 94, you would have thought they were the biggest band in the world. If they went to Connecticut, no one knew who Temperance was, right. It was hilarious, and Overcast, we learned that the hard way. Our first time we went out of Massachusetts or even the greater New England area, the first few times we're like, oh, okay. So like people don't just show up to every hardcore show. They have to like want to see you. We're like, okay, like, sorry, and then, we're like, we got to spread the word that way. We got to start just playing everywhere and knowing that like, yeah, it was the ultimate time of the local hero. You could be just huge. And then as soon as you left your area, just fall completely off the map.
That's funny that you had that experience with Overcast, just because, ostensibly during that time, there was a little bit more proliferation of that music, especially, whatever, Edison and Very Distro, these distros. But
when we got to that level, that at least, we did get a little more national. Like the first, we did some tours that you can't even call them tours or whatever in the early days that, yeah, they were basically like we had pen palled with enough people to like get all the way to Maryland and back, but yeah, once that's when things really changed for Overcast is having John Dudek at Very, Edison kind of support the band, because at that time, especially his distro was for a lot of people how they found out about so much music or found tracked down records by their favorite bands. So by getting on that label and being label mates with Coalesce and Stark Weather, bands that we not only were huge fans of, but we wanted to, like, that's the way we wanted to be looked at and thought of, and like, in that kind of mold, was huge for us. So, unfortunately, John passed away way too early, but man, Dudek had a huge imprint on the whole, U.S. heavy scene, but definitely the East Coast scene for sure. He was a big influencer back then.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. I mean, getting those Very Distro catalogs in the mail was like, oh my gosh, here's what I'm buying for the next year.
Dude, and his descriptions were the best. Like, like you could tell if he was not feeling something, it was super obvious in the description. Even though he's trying to sell you the records as a distro, he's still like,
yeah, still C-rate copy. Totally. No, it's fair. And that, ultimately helped you too, because you were able to be like, okay, my taste is either completely aligned with this person that wrote the review, or like, I don't agree with them at all. So I'm probably going to listen to the stuff that they did not like.
I'm all in now. Yeah, exactly. I'll show you. This is great.
Right.
Let me solve all of your holiday shopping problems right now by talking to you about the premium audio products from Raycon. They have wireless earbuds, headphones, and speakers that offer premium sound. I personally adore the wireless earbuds. I've been using them for 4 or 5 years. They got a ton of battery life. We're talking 54 plus hours. It's incredible. And honestly, I have gotten them for gifts for my significant other. I've gotten them for my family and friends, and they all come back to me and they're like, dude, this is incredible. Why have I never used these before? And I'm like, I don't know. That's your fault. That's why I am here to help you. And for the next month, Raycon will have a countdown to Christmas with a new pop-up flash deal for you to take advantage of every single day. Now, what can you do? You can go to buyraycon.com/Ray and get the best deals around. That gets you 15% off site-wide with code HOLIDAY plus free shipping. That is code HOLIDAY at buyraycon.com/Ray for 15% off your Raycon purchase and then free shipping. So again, go to buyraycon.com/Ray, solve all of your shopping problems, and then maybe, toss a pair of headphones there for you. Okay. Maybe just an idea, but thank you, Raycon, and buy them now.
If you're hearing this song on your phone, in your car, or in aisle 7 of the grocery store, you're not really hearing it. You're not really hearing the hypnotic disco synth as clearly as you could. You're not really feeling the bass line in your chest. And you're certainly not hearing a century of sound innovation. The The only way to hear this song the way the artist intended is to hear it on a Denon speaker. A speaker built with as much craft, dedication, and precision as the music it plays. Which means you won't just hear the song, you'll feel it. Denon wireless speakers, crafted by the sound obsessed, for the sound obsessed.
America is obsessed with true crime stories. Everywhere you go, you hear people talking about their favorite true crime podcasts. And all that excitement has made you a little crime curious. But with so many true crime podcasts to choose from, the real mystery is, where do you start? iHeartPodcasts has cracked the case. They created iHeart True Crime Plus, your source for the best true crime podcasts, all in one channel. iHeart True Crime Plus brings you the best of true crime, with shows that cover everything from unsolved murders and missing persons to heists, organized crime, and everything in between. So you're sure to find something you'll want to binge and share. And as an iHeart True Crime Plus subscriber, you'll also enjoy ad-free listening, early access to select episodes, and exclusive never-before-heard bonus content. Feed your true crime obsession. Subscribe to iHeart True Crime Plus today, exclusively on Apple Podcasts.
Band merch is the name of the game, and Rockabilia is the place where you need to buy all of your band merch. So first and foremost, use this code 100 words that gets you 10% off your order, and then plus, they know that this show sent you. Band merch is just the life's blood of bands of all shapes and sizes, and Rockabilia is the place where you can buy so much of it. You don't need to go to like 15 different websites. You go to one, you place one order, it ships to you quickly, efficiently from the Midwest, independently run business. Over 30 years they've been around, and they have so much stuff. Like if you're into Bring Me the Horizon, Led Zeppelin, Have Heart, like whatever it is you're into, you will find stuff there. So please go to rockabilia.com, 100 words, 10% off is the promo code, not 10% off the promo code. You get it. 100 words is the promo code. If you need me to spell that out, I will. 100 WORDS. But go to Rockabilia. You will have so much fun there and get lost for hours and then come away being the savior of your household as you're like, here you go, mom, here's a band shirt. Here you go, dad, here's a band shirt. Here you go, brother or sister. You can just shower all of them gifts, and then plus they will be indebted to you forever. So go ahead and do that. And enjoy rockabilia.com.
And so, like you said, previously, the idea of, playing music as a profession, was a joke. That wasn't even, a gleam in anybody's eye at that point. But you were pursuing that pretty, heavily as far as like obviously playing in Overcast and, pursuing that. Was there, because like you said, you did get a degree in literature. Was there kind of like a life path beyond, just basically kind of pursuing the band opportunities? Or was it like, nah, I'm just going to do this because the band is obviously fun?
Absolutely no other plans whatsoever.
Okay.
Like at that point in my life, I did somehow graduate through college. Like it took me a couple extra side classes here and there. And I loved my experience at Boston University, but mostly just for the experience. I did learn a lot in classes, but I met some incredible people. And at that point, music was all that I cared about, not just making it. I wanted to see it. I was not only playing hardcore shows almost every weekend or more, I was also going to see the Grateful Dead and Fish whenever possible. So I was touring with a bunch of hippie dirtbags and VFW buses and then going to jazz and reggae shows all the time, jamming with anybody. There were so many side projects. That was all I cared about. But like you said, I did not have any plans or how to make that into something, financially stable or anything like that. I just really did not care. I was like, I am going to experience this 100% and somehow figure out a way to, pay rent or find a place to stay or something. The last Overcast tour, I came back and I've never been as broke as I was. And I immediately had to take like 2 jobs for like a few weeks straight just to like get any rent together. Like it was crazy, but it didn't matter. Like I would have done it. I continue to. The first opportunity I got to get into another band, I jumped into it. It was like, oh yeah, cool. Let's see where this one goes. So, but there was no safety net outside of, I did have a degree, but again, it was a degree in modern literature. I was like, I'll read that book for you.
Right. It was either be a teacher or
not the most, not the most career-based sort of degree choice, but that was by choice. I wanted to just learn. I was there to learn and just experience things. And then music just became the everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of along those lines, like as you were pursuing all of these, by your parents' probably definition, like all these weirdo things, and obviously growing your dreadlocks and like all of these things that were pretty unconventional, for I presume in your parents' estimation, did they? I mean, clearly they were permissive enough to let you do these things because you did them, but was there any sort of strife in the household of like, oh, Brian, what the hell are you doing, bud? Like, what do you got going on?
Yeah, like a little bit, but it was, I feel like they always thought I was going to land on my feet. And the one thing though, they were like, you need to, get a degree. You need to do this. If you're going to try and do these other things, we'll, help you in any way. The hair thing, they gave up on that battle super early. Like they're definitely pick and choose your battle people. And they're like, if he wants to grow his hair down the floor, that's his choice, But yeah, there was times probably, in the late 90s, early 2000s when I first started, playing with Shadows Fall, where they're like, okay, bud, you're not 17, 18 anymore, like what is this going to be? And then honestly, things did pick up pretty quick from there. Like where within a couple years, I was like, yeah, no, this is all I've had to do for a little while. And they were like, really? And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, I'm still living like basically one step above a cardboard box, but like I'm living. And then when we, things picked up another level, they were like, okay, this is for real. Like, all right, and then once you get to stick those 2 Grammy medals in your parents' face, you're like, see, I told you.
Yeah. Hey guys, I'm not an abysmal failure. Okay.
That's like the only thing they would actually, because I would tell them things that just wouldn't make any sense. You're like, oh man, we're going to play with, Neurosis, Brutal Truth, and Buzz Oven out in Syracuse. It's the greatest show ever. And they're like, oh, God, what are you talking? Right. But then I'm like, hey, we got nominated for a Grammy, which is hilarious. I forgot to tell my parents when it first happened. It's kind of blanked on my mind, and like the neighbors told them, and they're like, are you serious? Like you finally, like, really? You're gonna, you forgot to tell us that you were nominated for a Grammy? I was like, oh, well,
Right. So, you told us about all these dumb shows you played. Right.
So excited to be label mates with, like Christian, but you didn't like think to tell us that you were nominated for a Grammy. I'm like, oh.
Yeah. Yeah. You're like, hey guys, the priorities are obviously in line. Okay. And focusing on Shadows Fall too, the business implications that started to, circle the band, and, obviously even Overcast as well, in regards to, putting out records and like actually getting, paid money for shows, even if it was $100. How has your relationship been with the business side of things? Like, is that something that you, kind of unwillingly participate in? Do you kind of try to keep it at an arm's length? Like where does your head kind of sit? And I presume it's evolved over time.
Yeah, at first I wanted to keep it as DIY as possible because, I really kind of came up in that, like, you put out your own records, you book your own shows, you find your own way sort of approach. But then honestly, things, once they started getting to a level where I was like, oh, whoa, there's a whole lot of mechanisms behind the scene if you want to take it to another level, where I wanted to learn them. But at first I was kind of like, all right, I'm willing to sit back and watch as well. So for the first few years, especially in the beginning of Shadows Fall, we were lucky to have a few mentors type of scenarios of some people who had at least a little experience, but also were learning but like very excited to learn. So the first guy that really kind of got us on our path that way, it started in the Overcast days, this guy Morgan Walker, who was a publisher. And some people have had did not have great experiences with how things ended with him down the road, just as far as some contractual stuff and him owning rights to certain things. But at the time when we first met him, the idea that you could get publishing from like college radio was insane. And even if he was getting a big percentage, we didn't care because we didn't know how to get it, what it was, why they would pay us. That's insane. Like, what do you mean? They'll just give us money for playing our stuff on the radio? Great.
Yeah.
And so we started learning about that side of things. He actually helped us negotiate our first deal with Century Media, and wow, they didn't like him at all. There was a very cookie cutter template for record deals that CM first had, I think more out of the European office at the time, because I think they had, more control of then, where it was like 6 albums, you sign your publishing over to their company, and that's that. And we were just like, nah, we're good. So like, luckily Tom B, who signed us at Century Media, wanted us so bad that he was like, I'm going to go to bat. We're going to try and change the way things are done here. We want to get bands that we can grow with and, create a career, not try and control their career. And once we had someone like that on the A&R side, and someone like Morgan, who really understood the legalese in a way that they were not super psyched about,
Sure,
hammered out a contract that was so good for us. Because not only could we put out stuff, like a good amount of records guaranteed with Century Media, it freed up stuff for them, honestly, as well, I think, by not having these, this giant commitment if things didn't work out as well. So it really, I think, worked out for everyone, but it was a battle at first. So we learned a lot through that process. And then we started working with this guy, Dave Ciencio, known as the Rev, who was originally our kind of like radio promotions guy through this company, The Syndicate. And we were the first band he managed, but we saw in him, we're like, man, this guy kind of gets not only how to market, he gets how to, work with people, and he's got a passion for this. And we needed people who had a very similar approach to us. And he really showed us like, hey man, you guys could like do this for real. Like, we could find ways to make this like your life. And we were like, that's all we want. So once we kind of had that original team, and we started trying to, we never weren't in the loop on anything those days. Like, we wanted to be on every email. We wanted all 5 guys to at least have the right to make a decision on something. If they wanted to just be like, don't care, fine. But no one had the excuse if something was done without them seeing it. And we kept that up till the end, which slowed things down sometimes, but was the only way we kind of knew how to do things, So,
yeah. No, that's I appreciate you articulating that, because I do think that, a lot of people get lost with the notion that it's like you have this, shadow cabal working with a band that's like pulling all the strings, and the band is just like, oh yeah, we're yes men, we'll do whatever our manager says. And it's just like, no, you guys operated that way. Like, each band is a different structure, and that was a structure that worked for you guys.
Totally. And that was just, we were all had done stuff on our own with other bands that we kind of like, you felt like you knew a little bit, and I'm like, and I also want to learn more. So that literally spun off where at one point I had even started my own radio and press promotion company. And, I thought about getting into management and maybe even some label stuff down the road. But, honestly, the band just became too busy at that time. Granted, after 15, 20 years in the business, by the end of it, I'm like, I don't really want to. I'm glad that didn't become the other day job, like down the road, because I was pretty burnt out on just the whole hamster wheel of the music industry at that time. But I can't imagine going into it not being hands-on at that time. That was just the only way we knew how to do anything. But also we were like, man, we're not some major label hit factory. Like, we need to create that like sort of Iron Maiden business model where you can make a career off of just the quality of the music and your hard work touring. We wanted to just be that band that was always working and always just sticking to what we wanted to do. And luckily, we were able to for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something I also find interesting, kind of about you as a person and the personality that you not only exude on stage, but, are by all accounts mutual friends existing alongside of you, where it's just like, you generically speaking, you are a nice dude, but like, but Shadows Fall definitely kind of, for lack of a better term, like built a big tent where you guys were trying to welcome as many people as possible, like to shows. There was not a lot of, I guess, for lack of a better term, like metal posturing. I'm going to guess that was something that really, was just sort of hardwired, not only in you, but the rest of your band's DNA, that it wasn't like, oh, hey, we're going to wear costumes on stage or whatever. Not throwing shade against people that do that, because that's their
totally.
vibe.
That's just what you can tell if you're faking something like that. And that's when it doesn't come off, when it comes off like gimmicky, where the band's just like, oh, the thing is to wear masks. Okay, cool. We'll wear masks, like you can tell when that's just thrown at it. But for us personally, yeah, we were I've heard way back us described as kind of like everyman metal. We were just like dudes, and I was like, yeah, man, I'm totally fine with that. And we did want our shows to be fun. That was a big thing that, like, man, lyrically, like an album like, The War Within is pretty intense. Like, for me, and just looking back, the songs are pretty heavy, but that wasn't our vibe, like on stage or even like at the merch table or definitely not at the bar afterwards. We were there to like be like, we are here to rock and or roll. Like we never had the very elitist metal vibe of like, oh, we don't even enjoy our own songs, they are so grim, that just wasn't us. But we also weren't, we weren't trying to ram a specific message down someone's throat either. Like, I used to love going to see, some of the more hardline bands back in the day, like Earth Crisis or whatever it was, who had a very defined message. And that's great in that scenario. But again, wasn't the five of us. So we're like, what do we love about this? We're like, man, we like driving around the country, playing metal, drinking beer, and meeting people, and so we're like, cool, that's our vibe.
Right. Yeah. You're like, let's boil it down to the simplest of terms. Like, here we go. Yeah. And I think that not only just from a calloused like business perspective that clearly gives you the opportunity to, bring more people in. But I think, looking at the flip side of that, I think because of all of your influences and the way that you guys were approaching, the creation of the music, is that you did not care where people came from, like if they were a hardcore kid or a metal kid or whatever. It's like you just wanted them there.
Totally. And like you said, there are good and bad things to that. When you are of a subgenre, especially if it's blowing up at the time, your place, the tours you can do, you're going to kill it there every night, and thing is, there might be a shelf life on how long that's the thing or whatever, but you have that thing. Shadows Fall straddled a lot of those things, for better or worse. It was great that if you look at our first 3 real tours in a row, we did a tour with Chrissy Dismember, Cataclysm, so brutal death metal, which we were by far, honestly, the softest band on that bill. The next tour was with King Diamond. So we went right to traditional metal. And then the tour after that was with Glassjaw. So those were our first 3 tours in a row. And we're like, man, we just covered a lot of ground.
Totally.
And we kind of picked up people along the way at each one. Cause we had the guitar solos for the old school metalheads and enough melodical vocals to pull them in and maybe show them something a little heavier than they were used to. And then for the death metal dudes, we had enough blast beats and death metal stuff to get it, but maybe we turned them on to something a little more melodic. And the hardcore kids, we had enough mosh parts that they could hit somebody too, but also, hey, we're like, man, I didn't realize I like guitar solos. Now I do. So it really, at that time, especially when everything was bubbling over in the U.S., in the early 2000s, heavy music wise, we were in a great place for that because we had kind of dipped our toe into so many things and introduced ourselves to so many different scenes that when things blew up, and we were luckily right there.
Yeah, you're in the position, and because you, like, to your point, you put in the work. It wasn't like you carved out your own spot. I'm not saying these
tours were even. That's what's funny is like people see some of the bills from back then. I always love that they'll see a lineup and be like, "Whoa, In Flames, Nevermore, Shadows Fall, Burn It Down. That must have been insane." Wait, Killswitch played their first show? I'm like, "Yep, that was upstairs at the Palladium, 200 people."
Right.
And they're like, no, that'd be a festival now. I'm like, well, yeah, it was not in 2000,
Yeah, totally. Yeah. People barely knew who these bands were for, whatever reason. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, but it was just awesome that, like, you got to do those kind of tours on that level where you really got to know those bands. So as things did progress, it was kind of cool to see a lot of those guys come up with you and supporting you. And the beauty of that scene, it was very, if we get a leg up, we're putting a hand down to pull someone with us. And that was, especially between like us and Killswitch Engage and Hatebreed and Lamb of God and like the bands that we actually like came up with and were good friends with, we all were doing that. And when everyone got a shot, we always tried to kick it down. And then whether it was to, any of the bands we knew, Unearthed, All That Remains, anybody, we all tried to kind of keep that vibe going.
Sure. Well, it's the, the active participants of this, particular DIY scene. Like, I don't care what that means. Like, every one of those bands that you listed all came from, similar-ish backgrounds where it's like, yeah, you're playing, right. You're playing in a VFW hall in front of 4 people. It's like, yeah, that's, That's
Yeah,
that's a vibe.
It's funny. We would go on tour with some bands who didn't do that, who would come up, kind of like maybe, perfect example was 2003 Ozfest second stage. There was a lot of these major label bands on their first record, and they would be given tour support and put on a bus and sent out on Ozfest. And, we're like, what's tour support? They gave you money before the tour to pay for things? We're like, oh no, see, Century Media made us give them an EP to do this. We have to pay them. Those guys halfway through the tour would be complaining about stuff or not, things would be going wrong and they couldn't handle it. And we're like, man, this is like Candyland for us. Are you kidding me? Like I literally played the basement of a bakery.
Right.
This place has catering. You're insane if this is a problem,
Right.
And you just kind of see the gears grind up some of those people who just weren't ready for adversity because, hadn't had to deal with it. And then we're like, man, we've seen it all,
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. The kind of hitting on that same tip, like the perception versus the reality of, being a band on the rise, like the moment that, whatever, you get on Headbangers Ball, everyone, from the public perspective looks at you guys and being like, oh, so like, you guys are like millionaires, Like
I always love, so how much money did you make off the videos on MTV? You're like, okay, you don't understand how this works. No.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, we didn't get paid for that. That was called exposure.
Not, exactly. Exactly. That's the classic. Oh, we got paid in exposure.
Right. Exactly. I could tell you how much exposure, paid for my child's college education. $0.
Exactly. It's like, I'm being exposed everywhere, and unfortunately, my zero bank account is being exposed as well.
Right. So when I mentioned that, like, what's the kind of I guess starkest contrast? Like, I mean, you guys were gladly participating in it, even though it was like, oh yeah, this is rough, but this is all still, part of our overall.
A perfect example is like Ozfest 2003 was one of the best times of my life. They were the best shows we were playing. So during the day, you're playing to, thousands and thousands of people in this huge place with all these huge bands, and you feel like the biggest rock star in the world, and you realize you're like, we're not getting paid, and you're like trying to just scrounge up stuff to just get food when you have a day off or figure out what you're gonna do. And it's crazy where you're like, this is the biggest we could possibly imagine music being for us. We never even thought we'd get to this level. Oh my God, we're going so broke,
Sure.
And the other thing that's great, my favorite whiplash from those things is when you do play an Ozfest one day and then you do an off date in some tertiary market, in the middle of nowhere, because you can only play so many thousand miles away from the next Ozfest. So you go from an amphitheater of 15, 20,000 people to just playing, some barn somewhere, to 85 people with 3 of the bands from that tour, and your buses are parked out front of it, and you're like, oh yeah, Ozzy's not here, so there's not 20,000 people. That's right.
Right. Yeah. Like we are clearly a sideshow to what is actually happening.
Totally. And it's we're getting our name out there, but you just realize that. But the perception of anyone who saw you that day is like, oh man, I saw you take a golf cart to the stage, man. You're a rock star, and you're like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's relative, my friend.
Exactly.
If you're hearing this song on your phone, in your car, or in aisle 7 of the grocery store, you're not really hearing it. You're not really hearing the hypnotic disco synth as clearly as you could. You're not really feeling the bass line in your chest. And you're certainly not hearing a century of sound innovation. The only way to hear this song the way the artist intended is to hear it on a Denon home speaker. A speaker built with as much craft, dedication, and precision as the music it plays. Which means you won't just hear the song, you'll feel it. Denon home wireless speakers, crafted by the sound obsessed, for the sound obsessed.
I'm Marcel Swiley, that dude, and host of More to It, a new iHeart original podcast that takes a deep dive into the biggest topics in sports, entertainment, and culture. The journey begins with headline news, which leads to deeper discussions about life lessons that are presented in every story. Each week, we tackle subjects and issues beyond the public's perception and narrative to learn more about the stories and about ourselves. Hosted by someone who defied the odds to go from Compton to the Ivy League and then played 10 years as an all-pro defensive end. This is not your typical sports show, with topics ranging from the social ills that surround us all to the character growth that occurs from overcoming adversity. You'll get inspired hearing stories that highlight the growing pains that fuels anyone on a successful journey. You'll leave every episode with a greater understanding that no matter the story, the person, or outcome, there is always more to it. Found on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you find your favorite shows.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tyler Florence.
And I'm Wells Adams. We're the hosts of the new podcast, Two Dudes in the Kitchen. And you might be asking yourself, why do these guys have a podcast?
Because we love food.
Yep.
You and I have known each other for a while. We got a chance to cook together on television on Food Network back in the day. And I got to tell you, there's no two better guys or more equipped to take you guys on a journey through the kitchen. It's all about great recipes. It's all about connecting with fantastic techniques and having a great time while you're doing it. This is a podcast for you to call into, give us your feedback, and we're here to answer your questions and kind of get those kitchen burners fired up.
I got a lot of questions just because I'm not nearly as good of a chef as you are. So I'm going to be asking you a lot of questions, and you guys out there can ask them as well. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to learn a lot. And you know what? Most importantly, we're going to eat good.
We're going to eat good, man. Eat good in the neighborhood, man. We're here for you.
Listen to Two Dudes in a Kitchen on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
And so, as you started to, have all of these different touring experiences, from festivals to, the ebbs and flows of the natural band life, for you, when did, I guess, the touring aspect start to kind of wear on you, where it's like, being gone 250 days out of the year when I have this, all of these relationships I'm maintaining at home. And, clearly, I mean, like you mentioned, now you have children. When did that, I guess, pull start to happen for you of like, this is not exactly the, the experience that I was anticipating some, 10 to 15 years into it or whatever.
Yeah, I really did love even the grind of it for a long, long time. The first time I remember feeling like almost fatigued, and it was a combination of everything, the business, the touring, the pressure of just follow-ups and all that was probably like 2007 when we had kind of signed to a major label and we were kind of, where's this going to go from here? And I remember just like being just so exhausted, like just in every way for a little while. And it took me literally just being like, I just got to be home for a minute and just recharge. And we were smart enough to do that. We were coming out of the studio recording Threads of Life, and we were supposed to go right to Europe before we'd even finished tracking, and we were going to have to fly back and finish something. And we were supposed to go to Europe with Killswitch Engage. And I was like, man, this is the first time I'm ever saying no to something. I was like, I cannot do it. Like, let's just finish this record and rest and be excited about music again, And thankfully we did that. And then the next tour we went out on was with Stone Sour on the Jaeger tour. And it was super blast and kind of got me right again. And I was like, all right. Then years after that, the first time that it really hit me that I couldn't keep doing it was I was on the Metal All-Stars tour in Bulgaria, and I watched my daughter crawl for like pretty much the first time on Skype and was like, this is too much. I was like,
right.
It would be one thing if we were, making millions of dollars and I could fly the family here and there and things like that. But I was like, the way we do it, it's 10 months out of the year, 9 months out of the year, especially then the early 2000 kind of era when record sales were just non-existent, anymore, where back in the day when we were selling a good amount of albums, especially on a label like Century Media, you could supplement your touring income with actual record sales and royalty checks and things like that. Once that dried up, if you want to be in a metal band and make money, you have to tour. You have to sell T-shirts, you got to move cloth, So I just saw that. I was like, I cannot be gone that much anymore. And that was really the final sort of feeling of it.
Sure. And you hitting on, a couple last things, the idea that you still care about music, because like, ostensibly, I know you're always going to like care about music, but like there's some study that went around a couple of years ago where it's like, I think the age is like, and I think Spotify commissioned it, where it's like 32 years old is when people kind of check out of checking, listening to new music or whatever. And that's, your average person or whatever. But like you are not only deeply engaged with the music, of your youth and obviously as you were coming up, but then, you're still checking out new bands and you're still an active participant. And this may sound simple, but like, why do you still care?
I just, it's in my DNA. Like I'm literally going to go on Thursday and Friday of this week and record vocals for the Downpour project that I started with some of the guys who used to play in Unearthed and a few other Boston bands. Because I'm playing in a band in St. Louis called Hell Night, and we just did a little live stream thing, and I can't stop. Like, it's funny because I remember after Overcast, I was like, man, that was a lot. I think I'm done. And for like a half hour, I thought that. And then literally Matt Bashand, when Overcast played our last note at the tune-in in Connecticut, I think there was still probably feedback. He's like, hey man, you want to be in Shadows Fall? I was like, can I change my shirt first and then let you know? Like I was just covered in sweat, like couldn't breathe, just trying to like put to rest something that I dedicated myself to for like, the last 8 years. And of course they're like, at the end of it, I was like, yeah, man, I'll give you a call tomorrow. Probably. Yeah, I'm probably in,
Right. It's just always
it just happens now. I got to St. Louis and the last thing I thought about was playing in a band from around here. And I went and saw Hell Night play because I'd met a few of the guys and was skateboarding with the guitar player. And as soon as they started playing, I was like, oh man, well, it's a good thing they got a singer because that's a band I would actually join. And then the singer was like, hey man, I think I'm leaving. You should, you should jam with these dudes. I was like, damn it. And I'm back in the band.
And that
what's funny is this is the most brutal stuff I've done too. That's what's even more hilarious. I'm like, really? So I get angrier as I go older?
Right.
I thought I'd just start a reggae project and be able to not sweat and like,
Yeah,
like, nope.
totally. Right. Yeah, it's like I think you're supposed to make the transition into your electronic chill music phase, but yeah, that's not the case.
I would always talk about that with Corey from God Forbid. He's like, man, I want to get out of this heavy metal so I can just put on a smoking jacket and play some jazz at the Marriott and like just chill. And carry a 3-piece. There's 3 drinks. That's all I want. Like, But we're both. He's in a band again. I'm in a band again. So that's what we do.
Yeah. That's your lot. That's your lot in life.
Yep, exactly. But as far as touring again, I don't ever see myself being a full-time touring musician again. But it is that's unless you're at a certain level, it can become a young man's game where, man, I thought of just like cramming into a van for like weeks at a time. It almost gives me PTSD a little bit, but man, I loved it at the time, but. Ooh.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Doing that now. Right. Yeah.
Exactly. I was like, let's do fly-in weekends. I'll see you at the hotel.
No, for sure. And kind of, I know I'd be remiss if I did not obviously talk about your dreads because literally every person who's ever interviewed you, I think it's a prerequisite. But the interesting thing, and this is actually something I was discussing, I had Thomas from Strike Anywhere on my podcast, like, I don't know, 2 years ago or something, but he has dreads as well. And I honestly never really thought about the concept of, why, because he articulated the story of, why he grew dreads in the first place of just, the connecting to Rastafarian culture and like, clearly white people with dreads, like that is a whole different meaning than, how the Rastafarians that originally grew their hair from a dreadlock perspective. I'm going to guess that like over time, like, maybe initially it was aesthetically like, or maybe it was because of that, initial exposure to Rastafarian or whatever. Has your, I guess, relationship with your hair, I know that sounds like silly to say, but like, has that kind of changed over time?
I have a relationship with my hair when there's a person standing behind you at all times that like almost touches the ground, you have a relationship with it. Yes. So that's a totally valid way to place that.
Sure.
But yeah, as far as for me, initially it did come out of seeing, HR from the Bad Brains. And really for me, it's funny. It wasn't even Bob Marley. It was Bunny Wailer was the first sort of reggae artist where I was like, just captivated, and then I started really like reading more about it and learning about it. And for me, it became a way to not only capture the passage of time, but sort of keep that living diary going. Some people get tattoos of every experience. For me, it was just connection to not only everything I'd been through and learned, but it also showed me kind of where I was going, and also a reminder to stay connected to just the earth. Because, to me, they feel like roots, almost like spiritual roots that can stay connected, almost sound like Avatar there or something, but
Sure.
Just that kind of thing. And I was joked when I learned everything there is and I figure it all out, I'll cut my hair. So plan on burying me with hair that goes on for miles, because there's so much more to learn. You can never figure it all out. You never will. You should always still be searching. So this is kind of like that reminder of that. Now, granted, when it gets stuck in the car door every time I'm at the grocery store and I get, my neck snapped, it does make me think maybe there's another way to do that,
Right.
But here we are. Anytime, I've never really thought of cutting them, but so it's what's weird is the idea just is never there. I feel like one day it will, and they'll probably come off that day, where the head will be shaved and that will be that. But it's just it still feels natural and right, and like I'm still heading somewhere with it. So
yeah, no, I appreciate that. The description of it, because I think that, when most people kind of look at aesthetic choices, whether it's, something like what you have done, or whether it's like, wearing X's on your hands, like that is both of those are statements, and that is a broadcast to the world of what you espouse. And so I think people that, would look at you just be like, oh, dude, like you're just doing that because, whatever, you think you look cool. And it's just like, well, no, it's more than that, buddy.
Yeah, indeed. If I thought it was just because they look cool, they would have been trimmed a long time ago. Because man, there's some hazards involved.
Yeah.
Gotta watch out with power tools and open flames and all that stuff. So.
Right. Yeah. You've learned all the pitfalls, as it were.
Exactly. It's like having a tail now. You got to know how quick you can go through doorways and stuff. So.
Right.
But yeah, and it's funny because people do come up and say things, and people are like, "Oh, I'm sorry to annoy you," but I'm like, it's not something you kind of see every day, so I totally get it. And I'm also like, if you would I would, it's not like I have it like hidden, like, oh, I don't want you to, mention it or talk about it, but still it can spark some good conversations and whatnot as well. But it's funny, it does become like sort of your signature as well. Like, people like, I can't imagine a Shadows Fall show without the hair spinning around. I'm like, yeah, no, it would just be me looking more like Scotty and headbanging, probably the music would sound just the same, like.
Totally. But yeah, that, and to your point, that idea of being able to spark discussion where people that may not have any idea what, anything in relation to, punk, hardcore, independent trains of thought, like you're able to engage with the person to be like, oh yeah, like, just look this up on the internet at home and your mind will be blown.
Indeed. Yeah. It's anything that can spark that sort of conversation is always a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. The last thing I want to hit on was the notion, because you are, a father and you are still, very connected to this, independent train of thought where it's like, okay, clearly I did not follow the path of life that most people, do. And then, watching your kids grow up and understand that, hey, my dad looks different and my dad plays in a band and all that stuff. How does that kind of, I guess play a part of your parenting? Because I imagine that is a thought that goes through your mind a lot.
Without a doubt, it's funny because both myself and my wife, she's an artist who owns her own business and creates her own textiles and materials and all that, and has always been incredibly creative. And then I've always kind of been dedicated to music and different things. It's really reminds us that you have to let people stumble along and find their own thing, but giving them that bedrock to start from. And, I, again, being raised by teachers, education was always a big thing. So that, to me, they're not separate, but as far as it having to be contained in a traditional way, I have no problem with them finding their own way through that, whether it's, not a traditional college experience or by, traveling to learn, like all those different things that I'm very open to because I've met so many people who've reached their goals or evolved themselves in such just different ways, and in such a wide variety of avenues to get them where they needed to go, that I'm very open to them finding that. But that does not mean that they're getting away with anything. Like
Totally.
I still have the hammer of justice available whenever needed, and they know that. It's funny because me and my wife, she's got dreads as well, like pretty hippy dippy couple, and we're probably we're not strict in the that sort of old school sense, but like our kids got rules, man. They and they got to work, they got to do things, and like we're both very hardworking people, and they got to get some of that work ethic in them as well, and but man, they're both already such just amazing little people and getting so creative in their own ways. They've followed me down some paths where they both started skateboarding, things like that, but then they branched out and, like they're doing their own things as well, with different, sports and things like that as well. So it's cool. They both love music and used to be really into like family circle pits and like listen to a lot of old hardcore, but man, of course, just like every other kid, they're starting to rock all the stuff on the radio and all that. And you can't fight it. You got to let it happen,
Yeah.
And then I'll let them, but I at least, our record collection is pretty eclectic here. So they hear a little of everything. So, but yeah, it definitely, I'm glad I had that DIY spirit. I'm glad I saw so much of the world that also reminds you how people are so similar, no matter how different things have gone in their lives. By traveling the way I have, you really see such a connection with people. And realize, that man, I'm just going to help them find their path. And then from there, just support them on it. And just remember anytime that, that I forget that, like, hey, if I wasn't given certain opportunities, I wouldn't have been who I was. And sometimes you got to, maybe ease those reins when it feels scary and let them kind of go. But it is what it is.
Yeah, no, yeah, it definitely is weird. Just the notion of, parenting coming from the background that we did.
I was going to the channel in Boston when I was 14 years old. My daughter's now 8. I'm like, that was only 6 years later. Like, no way in 6 years would I allow her to go see Slapshot at the channel. Like, no way. She's not going to see these. She's not driving in a car when she's 14 with people she barely knows to CBGB's in New York to go to a hardcore show. I'm like, that's impossible. But then I'm like, oh yeah, but that's exactly what I did,
Yeah, you're like, well, maybe as long as I know the venue.
Yeah, well, that's what's funny is I was like, I could take you to these places now, but it also would not be the same experience, that like I had. I was fighting for my life. I was like, I'll get you on the side of the stage.
Right. No, totally. Yeah. You're like, I can take you to these places. Like, I know the guy at the door. I can get you in.
Yeah, totally. It's a very different experience. Well, that's what's funny. So for that I'm worried about that too. Is like, for me, that the danger and the like, oh my God, should I even be doing this was part of it. Where like my kids have already gone and saw like Jason play with Overkill and like, they feel like met all the dudes in the Dropkick Murphys and like all that stuff. So it's like, they're like, this isn't scary. This is dad stuff,
Right, totally. Yeah. They'll be like, oh, these are dad's lame friends that play.
Totally. It's hilarious how that shifts, because like, yeah, that was part of it. So like they'll find their own thing, that way, so
right. Yeah.
You gotta let it happen.
Yeah, no, totally.
God, who knows what that'll be in 10 years? God, that's scary.
Yep, I think that's the scariest thought of just like, okay, what are they going to bring home that's going to be so foreign to me, and I won't even know what to do with it.
Totally, just having that "it's happened to me" moment, like, get off my lawn. Fine, I said it.
Yeah, no, totally. Well, Brian, thank you so much for hanging out, dude. I really appreciate it, and yeah, thanks for letting me pick your brain in all these weird places.
No problem, man. I really appreciate it, and yeah, it was a great talk, man. Anytime.
That was Brian for all of you fine people out there in podcast land. Thank you for listening to the show. And thank you very much for Brian for hanging out with me for an hour plus on a beautiful Tuesday or whenever it was that we recorded it. I can't remember. But yeah, Brian, great dude. Check out all of his music. If you, for whatever reason, have been living under a rock and have not listened to Overcast or Shadows Fall, do yourself a favor and check that stuff out. So I played Overcast at the very beginning of the episode. So yeah, hopefully you'll be able to get a little taste of it and then be like, oh yeah, actually, why am I sleeping on Overcast? So next week is another legend, in self-described in my own mind, Greg Anderson, who runs the label Southern Lord Records, also played in a band on Revelation Records called Engine Kid, and they just recently released a 6 LP box set on Record Store Day, and so I talked to him a little bit about that. And then he also plays in the very enigmatic band called Sun, him and Stephen O'Malley. When this opportunity came up to speak to him, I jumped at it because Greg also played in a classic straight edge hardcore band called Brotherhood. And he's also re-released some really, really cool records. Like he re-released on Southern Lord, the Uniform Choice Screaming for a Change LP. He's done a lot of great stuff. And he also releases modern hardcore, like bands like Entry, and Dead in the Dirt. And he's released a lot of Nail stuff. So there was a lot to talk to Greg about. So I sat him down and asked him a ton of questions. And that's what will happen next week. So until then, please be safe, everybody.
If you're hearing this song on your phone, in your car, or in aisle 7 of the grocery store, you're not really hearing it. You're not really hearing the hypnotic disco synth as clearly as you could. You're not really feeling the bass line in your chest. And you're certainly not hearing a century of sound innovation. The only way to hear this song the way the artist intended is to hear it on a Denon home speaker. A speaker built with as much craft, dedication, and precision as the music it plays. Which means you won't just hear the song, you'll feel it. Denon home wireless speakers, crafted by the sound obsessed, for the sound obsessed.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tyler Florence.
I'm Wells Adams. We're the hosts of the new podcast, Two Dudes in a Kitchen. And you might be asking yourself, why do these guys have a podcast?
Because we love food. We got a chance to cook together on television, on Food Network back in the day, connecting with fantastic techniques and having a great time while you're doing it. This is a podcast for you to call into, give us your feedback, and we're here to answer your questions and kind of get those kitchen burners fired up.
Listen to Two Dudes in a Kitchen on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
I'm Marcel Swiley, that dude, and host of More to It, a new iHeart original podcast that takes a deep dive into the biggest stories in sports, entertainment, and culture. We start with headline news and journey into deeper conversations, always finding those life lessons that are presented in every single story. Did you know why football is a great game of skill, but a greater game of will? You'll know when you listen to More to It on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you find your favorite shows.